Welcome everyone, this is On Just Restart, and yes, as many were fearing and worrying, the sequel to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild has been delayed to spring 2023, which would place it 6 years after the release of the original Breath of the Wild, which would mean that the development time is significantly longer than Breath of the Wild, even though it's a sequel, a direct one, using the same world and based off the same engine. Despite all of that, the development time is longer and we are seeing another delay for a big Zelda game. So today we're going to be talking about is the announcement today, what it may entail, and questioning if there could be another delay, or if this will be the very last delay for Breath of the Wild 2. Now before we jump into things, let me first very quickly talk about my social media. You may see a few different things here on screen. You can check it all out. It is linked in the description below. And of course, if you like what you're seeing here, you can subscribe or perhaps even consider joining as a member. So firstly, let me just say, yes, I am one of the people who had a hope, a belief that this time Breath of the Wild 2 would not be delayed because of how long it had already taken, because of all the work beforehand, because of how long they took to even give us a release timing. Yet despite all of that, here we are, again, sure enough, with another Zelda delay. It's disappointing, yes, because obviously we wanted to play the game as soon as possible, right? But that doesn't mean there aren't good things to this. It does suggest some interesting things. As they say in the announcement, this goes beyond just the sky and the land of Hyrule. What are those implications? Are they suggesting that there will be underwater exploration, underground exploration? Potentially. Perhaps this could be alluding to big, massive dungeons harkening back to previous Zeldas, but with the Breath of the Wild open-air style. Perhaps we could be going to the upper reaches of the sky, the atmosphere, perhaps even space. I don't want to say space exactly like space travel, but perhaps we could be seeing realms in the world of The Legend of Zelda that go beyond just the typical land, sky, and sea. And that could be really exciting to see. And it's not just about what we're exploring, but what we're exploring with here. There's an allusion to different mechanics and gameplay ideas that could be different this time around. We've already seen some patents of some pretty cool things, with Link having different maneuvers in the sky and the ability to move upwards vertically, phasing through terrain. There are some really interesting things we've already seen that could have tremendous impacts on what you can do with the gameplay. And when you factor in the pretty sophisticated physics of Breath of the Wild and what they may be stacking on top of that, surely there's enough there that could lead to some delays because there's a lot to be worked on there. And there's a hope that the amount of time they're putting into this does mean that this is not going to suffer from sequelitis. It's not going to suffer from feeling too redundant or the same as Breath of the Wild. And maybe that's what they're trying to do here. They're trying to make a game that, while from a story perspective and a world perspective is the same as Breath of the Wild or a continuation of Breath of the Wild, they may still want it to feel fresh and new, so they're putting in a ridiculous amount of time into this game, to the point where they might as well have just created an entirely new Zelda game, because we've seen other Zelda games built from the ground up, new engine, new art style, new gameplay ideas, in a shorter amount of time than this. So it is a little bewildering, but when we take the pandemic into account here, and just how massive the scope this game could be, it was conceivable. I didn't expect it, or rather I didn't predict it, because I wanted to be optimistic here and just assume that, hey, already a development cycle that is longer than the initial development cycle with a release this holiday would have been fine enough, but we're gonna have to wait a few more months here. Hopefully just a few more months though. We don't know that for a fact yet. We've already seen delays, so why should we assume we can't see any more? I played the side of assuming that if Nintendo tells us 2022, then I'm gonna believe 2022. Should I believe spring 2023? Well, I do believe that, actually, but maybe not. So firstly, let's just consider the perspective that this time around, Nintendo was spot on, and spring 2023 is when it's going to be coming out. When in spring? Well, typically, when we see spring games, the big ones, they come out in March, to come out at the end of the fiscal year, in time for Nintendo's annual financials and such. We've seen a lot of big releases then. Breath of the Wild, Animal Crossing, Monster Hunter Rise, so, you know, maybe they'll do that this time around as well. Even most recently, Kirby and the Forgotten Land, which had a spring 2022 release timing, and it came out in March. So hopefully we see this game less than a year from now. And considering that Nintendo was more specific this time around with an actual season, not just year, that does suggest that they have a more focused, more precise perspective and idea of when this game is actually going to be complete and ready to go. But with the game coming out now in 2023, and with the history of Nintendo using Zelda to launch alongside hardware, look at the Nintendo Wii and Twilight Princess, the Nintendo Switch and Breath of the Wild, Link's Awakening and Switch Lite. Could it be the case that maybe we could see Breath of the Wild 2 coming out alongside some new type of hardware from Nintendo, be it Nintendo Switch 2 or a Nintendo Switch Pro? If that's the case, could we see another delay for this system? Because spring 2023 seems a bit early for a next generation, but how far off will we be by then? Maybe not that far off, right? If the system's supposed to come out in 2024, could we see another delay for Breath of the Wild 2? I don't want to think that. I don't think they'll delay it a whole other year, but could it be the case that maybe there's a mid-gen refresh or a Switch Pro that could be coming out sometime next year and the next generation's not starting for a few years after that? If that's the case, could Breath of the Wild 2 be delayed or be coming out alongside that system? Does that system come out early next year or does it come out a little bit later? These are possibilities. I hope Breath of the Wild 2 comes out as soon as possible, which at this point would be spring 2023, and I think it's more likely than before because it's an even more specific release timing, but we won't know until it actually happens, it seems. So, fingers crossed the game, with its incredibly long development time, comes out as the best possible game it can be and is like one of the greatest games ever, and we enjoy it very much so. Spring 2023 with all of its incredible enhancements and mechanics and such, and maybe we'll get more news on it, perhaps even to a significant degree, at this year's E3. But what do you guys make of this situation? Do you guys think this is the last delay for Breath of the Wild 2, or do you think more could be coming? Let me know in the comments below. Anyways, everyone, this is On Just Restart. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'll see you all really soon. Take care. Bye.